Okay, so let's welcome Professor Charlie.
Do you like this or do you like this?
You have to turn it on.
Yeah, well, that'll help, right? 你们有没有这个 or 那个？那个。哦，记得。哎，谢谢你们。Thank you so much for actually. 我对不起你们。80度，太阳了。It's so beautiful. It's 80 degrees out. It's so sunny. I can't believe we're sitting here on 8th Avenue. 谢谢你们 but 对不起你们。不好意思 make you come in from such a beautiful day. But we're coming in to talk about a really marvelous period in art and cultural history and literary history too. Today is art plus music. We happen to have a piano too. You know that? What's that? You know this. Right? That's the scale that we all learn. How many people play the piano? Come up, right? That's the scale you learn for your Mozart. When you do your Mozart, you do this. Right? Oh, sorry. That's the scale. But this is the scale. That's the scale for what? That's the blues scale, that's the jazz scale. And actually having a piano in here, fantastic. It's a rehearsal room. That's one of the reasons why we're here. 600 years, musicians, composers, people who had to learn the piano did one type of scale. All of a sudden they're doing another type of scale. Flat the third, flat the seventh. And they're doing something called syncopation. Syncopation? Yeah? What's that mean?
Oh, I learned it in dancing.
Yeah, it's like, oh, go ahead. Do you want to come and dance? It's a great dance studio. Syncopation is, instead of ER sound, so it's ER sound. So it's syncopation is a little bit of delay. Now, why do I start with something silly like that? Because the freedom of the jazz age, the freedom that brought her, Pan Yu Liang, from Shanghai and Nanjing to Paris, was the freedom, here we go, let's go. The freedom of the jazz music, the freedom of Paris, of course, the freedom from censorship. So let's start. But the way I like to start, and I think you might remember this, is this. A place and time, a city, and a particular year in history. Where would you like to have lived and been? Some people could say, if you love art, right, they say, I would love to have been in Florence in the 15th century when the great Renaissance masters were in Florence, or I would love to have been in Amsterdam in the 17th century when Rembrandt and Vermeer were there. I would like to have been in Xi'an or Chang'an in the Tang Dynasty, Li Bai, Bai Juyi, Du Fu, etc. Right? Where would you like to have been? Come on. Li Bai, you want to meet Li Bai in Chang'an, in Xi'an? Drinking baijiu? Yeah, that would be a great time. Now you have the idea, right? What city, what period? When everybody is there. It's like a party, right? It's like a party and somebody comes back and says, you should have been there, Joel. Everybody was there. Everybody was in Amsterdam in Dutch art at a certain moment. Everybody was in Florence or Rome or Venice at a certain moment in Italian art. I'll give you one. Yizhou Lingling, 1900. 1900, what city? In Austria. Say it?
Vienna.
Who said that? You're good. You're good. 1900 Vienna, who was there? You told me we could do this interactively, not just a lecture. Yizhou Lingling, Vienna, who's there?
That psychologist.
That psychologist named Sigmund Freud. Yeah, Freud, that psychologist. Freud was there, Sheila was there. I need to know who you know. Sheila, really, really interesting artist. You like art? If Sheila was there, who else is there? Clint. Who said that? You get extra credit. Sheila was there, Clint was there, Freud was there. One of my personal favorites, a chap named Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein. He was there. Really interesting, right? And Lewis was there and a whole bunch of others. Yizhou Lingling, go to Vienna. Actually, Vienna before Yizhou Lingling. Right back to this. Come on, Vienna when Mozart was there. Vienna when Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, all in the same city, all at the same time. What do we say in China? Come on. Come on. Right? Fantastic. So, this. Let me keep asking, where would you like to live? People talk about this now, you know. Artists, I'm a curator and I run a museum. People say, I wonder where it's hot right now. I wonder where the place to be is right now, where all the talent, all the geniuses are together. Yo, what are you doing playing with my thing?
No.
Okay, make sure. Where is it now? Anybody in contemporary art? Are you?
New York.
Who? Huh?
Brooklyn
Yeah, well, that's cool, right? Brooklyn.
or Santa
Or where? Saint-Tropez?
Fe? No, New Mexico, Santa Fe.
Yeah, I've heard that. Santa Fe, but though when D.H. Lawrence was living there, that's pretty cool. I've never been to Santa Fe. How about Shanghai? How? Some people say you want to be where it's hot, go to Shanghai. Many people in my world, contemporary art, they say Berlin. You want to be where the action is, you go to Berlin. Huh? What do you think? Where do you want to be?
I still want to be in Vienna.
Yeah.
Last winter.
Yeah, I had a great teacher of that. And one of the reasons why I did this book was that I had a teacher who was so good about what happens when people come together in one place at one time and feed off of each other. The artists, the writers, the musicians, and Mr. Freud, when they're all, and by the way, Albert Einstein, when they're all together in one place and time. But some people, by the way, would say the time to have been in New York was what decade? In New York, what time? Not now. Many people would say not so much now.
60s.
Yeah, cool, that's good. London in the 60s too. But London in the time of Queen Elizabeth, when Shakespeare was on the stage, right? Wouldn't that be fantastic? But also New York in the 1950s. So anyway, here we go, ready? From 1919 to 1929, the place to be, no question, was Paris. Why? Why? Paris is so romantic, right? So romantic. You want to be in Paris because it's romantic, but what else? What about Paris, 1919 to 1929?
Must be cheaper to live there.
Very economical, very Chinese. equals 10 franc. And it was a very good exchange rate. France had just come out of a war. Their economy needed American dollars. So he's right, very Chinese, absolutely right. Other reasons though? In New York, one of the reasons this is so important is in New York, you could not, why? Yeah, prohibition. Hey, ni hao. How are you? Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for coming. And because of prohibition, you weren't allowed to have alcohol. Because of prohibition, and by the way, guess who was the president? Do you know this part? Remember this part? Guess who was the president of the United States during the 1920s, and he passed prohibition. And anybody who knows me, like she knows me, knows that I love putacho and I love pijo. It was my great uncle, Calvin Coolidge. My great uncle was the president of the United States. Yeah, that's right. And he was called Silent Cal. Silent Cal meant he didn't like to talk very much. So this is pretty funny, right? I talk too much and I drink too much. And he was my great uncle, but this is the most important part I want you to know. This has to do with Pan Yu Liang. You couldn't drink 不好意思. Also, you couldn't have certain dirty books or certain dirty photos or watch certain naughty movies. It's New York in the 1920s was very, very strict. How do you say that in Chinese? Strict. Funny. Very, it reminds me, by the way, of when I lived in China. I lived in China before any of you was born, I think, pretty much. Not 1984, 1985. And they had something then called spiritual pollution campaign was going on. Deng Xiaoping was still alive. Oh my God, I am spiritual pollution. I'm walking spiritual pollution back and forth. Spiritual pollution campaign was all about, sex, you know, and alcohol and certain types of music and dancing, right? This place, New York, is hard to believe, was very strict. And among the books that was banned by the post office and by the government, 不好意思 was a book by, not this book, was a book by him. 你知道不知道? Very important book, 特别 important book. Starts with you. You said, give her extra credit. She said Ulysses. Why? Ulysses was banned. You get caught with it, they will arrest you. If you get caught with Ulysses and the post office says Ulysses was delivered to your house, they will arrest you. Why? Why? Do you know? Do you remember? There are scenes in Ulysses that are, you know, about sex. There's one scene in Ulysses where he's going to the bathroom. I'm not kidding. And then the government and there's other stuff, but it's not. By the way, it's not politics, bush politics. It's all about morality and ethics. They were called the Comstock Laws, and you couldn't get his book. So he also had been sort of banned in Ireland. His home country was Ireland. Did you know, right? Dublin, Ireland. But he was, because of the Catholic Church was very strong, and I don't want to offend anybody, but because the Catholic Church was so strong, he said, I'm leaving. I'm leaving, I'm going to go to Paris, because in Paris, here we go, in Paris you're free. In Paris you're free to play the scale that way, it's jazz. In Paris you're free to write the dirty books. It wasn't, by the way, just so you know, it's not a dirty book. It's a bloody masterpiece. It's a work of art. And when finally in the 1930s, after the stupid Nazis had burned books, which reminds me, by the way, we're going to be talking about Cultural Revolution later on. The Nazis burned books. Finally someone said, this is not a book about sex. This is a great masterpiece of literature. Everybody knew it. So, when all the young American writers and British writers wanted to go somewhere where the greatest genius in the world was working and writing, they went to Paris. They would get to Paris, you know, when I did the book, they would write home a little postcard. I just saw James Joyce having dinner. You know, it's like, you guys, I don't know, what do you like to look at? It's like, oh my God, there's LeBron James. I just saw LeBron James in the bar, you know, hitting on a girl. It's so cool. I take a picture of it. And they would say, I just saw James Joyce having dinner. The other one that they wanted to be near, if you were an artist, if you were a painter, before I do the slide, who? The most famous painter of this time. The most important painter.
Picasso.
Yeah, that's very good. There he is. Look at those eyes. He'd look right at a pretty girl. He'd say, I am Picasso, I'd like to draw you. And the girls were just like this. This is Picasso almost at the peak. I don't know if we should make this an art lecture, but Picasso was this was after Cubism. Picasso had just started going out with a very pretty little ballerina. We're in a dance studio. Her name was Olga, and he was working with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. Ever seen the movie The Red Shoes? The Red Shoes movie, that's about the Ballet Russe. Okay, never mind. So you want to be somewhere where all the greatest geniuses are. You go where Joyce is. You go where Picasso is. If you're a great artist, you measure yourself against Picasso. It's like a fight. I could try it. I could fight with him. Maybe I could show you how good I am compared to Picasso. So here we go a little bit. This is Gertrude Stein. The interesting thing about Gertrude Stein was this. She was a gay lesbian. And people, and this is weird, right? She's from San Francisco, but people in San Francisco didn't accept her sexuality, didn't accept her poetry. She was a really brilliant poet. She had a salon, just like yours, and where everybody would come, except that she had wine. She had a salon where everybody would come to talk about art, to talk about literature, to talk about music. She was a mégorin. If you watch that Woody Allen movie, Woody Allen, Midnight in Paris, remember? They go to her house. You know why Hemingway would go to her house? Free wine, free food. But also, when you went to her house, you talked about, you know, who's hot, who's not. What show do I have to see? What novel should I read? That was where it was all happening. This one, I'll go a little bit quickly, but this is one of my idols. His name was Gerald Murphy. He was married to this beautiful woman named Sarah Murphy. All the boys were in love with Sarah Murphy. F. Scott Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Archibald MacLeish, all the boys, especially, by the way, this was Gerald Murphy. He went to the same prep school as I did, by the way. Anybody know a prep school named Hotchkiss? He and I went to the same school. Where'd you go, okay?
No.
Okay, good. Then you could stay if you didn't do it, okay? He went to Hotchkiss. His father ran something called Mark Cross. Do you ever heard of Mark Cross? It was bought later by Coach. And Mark Cross was for leather, like belts and wallets. And his father ran this beautiful fashion company called Mark Cross. But he didn't want to just go into the business and make a ton of money. He wanted to go, hi, ni hao. He wanted to go, every time I turn around, some pretty girl comes through the door. It's fantastic. He wanted to go to Paris to become a painter. And this is what he painted. This painting is up at the Whitney. It is a fantastic painting. It's called Cocktail. Oh, would you look? Remember, they weren't allowed to drink when they were in New York, so this one's called Cocktail. And it's his father's bar tray, his father's cigars, his father's lemon, his father's tray that he made cocktails. Every day at his house in Antibes, which is on the Côte d'Azur, on the southern coast of France. Anybody ever been to Antibes? Oh, let's go together next time, right? Antibes is beautiful. It's right on the coast. It's where we should be today. We should do this in Antibes. And he had this beautiful house called the Villa America. And at the Villa America, ready for this? That's where F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda would go every night for cocktails. That's where Ernest Hemingway and his wonderful wife named Hadley, the good wife, the Paris wife. Anybody know about this? There was a really good wife, and then there was her best friend, her best friend named Pauline, came and stole Hemingway and became Hemingway Furet #2, the arson. During this time, Hemingway would go to the Villa America, Fitzgerald would go to the Villa America, Picasso would go to the Villa America. Picasso liked the Murphys, going back, he liked them so much, he brought his mama, Picasso mama, came to the Villa America, and all the ballet roos. It was fantastic. The conversations under the tree, on the patio at the Villa America, were like the greatest conversations about art, and music, and literature, and life. The greatest conversations. You couldn't have conversations like that back here in New York. That was what he painted. This is Picasso with Sarah Murphy on the beach. And then this is Picasso's painting of Sarah Murphy. And the big rumor was always this. You know Picasso's reputation, right? Chabrol, woof woof. Right? The big question was, did Picasso and Sarah Murphy, And the answer, I think, is in the painting. By the way, this painting is a great painting. This is the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's called The Woman in White. It used to be called Madame Picasso, but this is not his wife. This is Sarah. And I'm pretty sure, as I look at it, and this is a great, great painting. He seems to know a lot about painting. Who knows a lot about painting? Nobody's going to admit it. He seems to know a lot about painting. No? Picasso had been doing Cubism. Did you know Cubism? Break up the image a lot. So, and his friends were saying, hey, Picasso, Cubism is the modern way. Cubism is abstract. Cubism is the way of the future. Why did you then come back to painting so realistically? Why did you do it like that, so old-fashioned? Almost like a 19th century painting. And of course, Picasso had a pretty cool answer to that, by the way. He said, Cubism, realism, all the same to me. Make sure, cover it all up. Cubism, realism, all the same to me. A little bit like some of the musicians would say this, and this. Rhapsody in Blue. Gershwin and others would say classical notes, classical keyboard, classical style, classical scale, or jazz scale. It's all the same, just notes. Just paint on paper, paint on canvas, words on the page, notes. Do you get that? That's one of, actually, by the way, if you don't, I understand. That was one of the hardest things about writing my book. How did they go from being one style of writing, one style of playing the piano, one style of painting, to something really different? How did they make that transition? And when we get to Pan Yu Liang, and I promise you sometime tomorrow or Tuesday, I'll be talking about Pan. When we get to Pan Yu Liang, I want to talk about how she went from being a Chinese painter to being almost like a foie gras. How did she go from one style to another style? Let's keep going. These are the friends that gathered at the Villa America. Dorothy Parker, you know this name? Very, very funny lady. But she used to write for the New Yorker and Vanity Fair. Actually, when Calvin Coolidge died, somebody came in and said, did you hear that the president died? And she said, how could they tell? He's so quiet. He's so quiet. This was one of my heroes. His name is Archibald MacLeish. He was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's advisor, speechwriter, and also John F. Kennedy's advisor, speechwriter. Listen to his story. Listen to this story. He also went to the same prep school that I went to, Hotchkiss and Murphy. He was great friends with him. He's a poet in Paris, right? There was a day when he was offered partnership in a law firm. But yeah, you're looking at me like, oh no, he didn't. Oh yes, he did. He's offered partnership in a law firm. You know what that means, right? That means partnership in a law firm means that you've been brought up to the level of being a partner. You're going to be very rich, but your job is secure. And he did not come home that night until about an hour late. And he walked into his beautiful wife. Her name was Ada. She was 8 years older. And he said, "Furan, I have just been offered partnership, but I'm not going to take it. I'm going to go to Paris, and I'm going to become a poet." So brave. So brave. He said, I need to do this. I need to go to Paris. I need to be there where it's free. I need to take this step. This is exactly the brave decision that Pan Yu Liang made. This is really, really something for you to understand. These guys, it takes, hey, maybe I don't have to say that to the people in this room, Mr. Zhang. Maybe you understand. It takes a lot of courage to say, I'm going somewhere. I'm going to leave home where I know where I can do everything. Li Ji, you should know, right? You know. I'm going to leave home, I'm going to leave Shanghai, and I'm going to make it in New York. Right? Am I hitting a chord here? Yeah. Okay, good. I love this part of writing my book. I so admire them. They took the brave step of becoming poets, artists, writers, musicians. When they had jobs back here, when they have a lot. By the way, MacLeish was pretty wealthy. Murphy was very wealthy. She was really wealthy. Her house is right around the corner from my house, out in the Hamptons. No, East Hampton. East Hampton. Huge mansion in East Hampton. That was their house in East Hampton. Right around. I go by it on my bicycle. In fact, I went by it on my bicycle this morning when I was thinking of calling Mr. Zhao and saying, I'm a little sick. I can't make it. It's so beautiful out on the beach. Let's keep going. This was a really interesting generation, and of course one of the most important ones, and this one maybe you like, right? Because what was his job? Hemingway never went to college. Hemingway did not go to Yale, Hemingway did not go to Harvard, and Hemingway did not go to Princeton. Hemingway did not go to college, he went to war as a stretcher bearer, and he had a terrible war. Oh boy, did he have a bad war. And then his job was, Sinovision, journalist. Hemingway was a newspaper reporter. One of the reasons why he's such a good writer, I think, is he wrote a lot. So that's Hemingway, by the way, a wonderful bookstore that published James Joyce's Ulysses for the first time. It's called Shakespeare and Company. And when my book came out, they put it in the window. So it was so great. So picture, friends of mine who were in Paris said, O'Reilly, your book is in the window, Shakespeare and Company. All he wanted, by the way, all he wanted was for his picture to be on the wall of Shakespeare and Company, next to James Joyce, next to Joseph Conrad, next to, I'm trying to remember all the rest of them, next to all the great ones. Hemingway was a kid, like you must be 20? Oh, that's Tyler. You're, how old are you?
I'm 14.
Hello, when we get, how old are you? Yeah, Arshisan, that's about the same age as Hemingway in that photograph. Hemingway in that photograph, and look at this one. Look at this one, everybody. Scott and Zelda. And in New York, Scott and Zelda were like the biggest celebrities around. She would jump into the fountain. She would take off her clothes at the bar. He was getting the most money of any writer for every short story. He was hot. He was really hot. But he had in his desk a manuscript. And he was working, maybe Nichiro Puchiro Changdao, Great Neck, Nichiro? Great Neck? He was living in Great Neck in an apartment. Over a garage, he had a little study, and he was working on the manuscripts. And the manuscript was for his masterpiece. What is it?
Very good.
You got it. This is when they were in Paris in the Champs-Élysées, and this is Gatsby. And very briefly, before I get to Pan Yu Liang, I'm going to tell you something. Scott Fitzgerald, without Paris, this wouldn't have happened. The Great Gatsby, when he was in Cheongda, right, was a nice story about the usual Scott Fitzgerald thing. Pretty girls, drunk guys, a little bit of romance, Daisy and Gatsby, but nothing like what he got. When he got to Paris, he met James Joyce. He met Picasso. He hung around at the Villa America. His conversational level, are you following me here? What happened? He could not have written The Great Gatsby without this experience. What happened? What do you think?
Without talking to people of more posh.
Posh, I guess you could say, creative geniuses, right? Yeah, kind of like that. You're making it sound too much, I think, like a class thing. Posh means rich, and he was hanging around with rich people. But by the way, I'm wearing this ugly tie. You see this ugly tie? I went to Princeton. I hate the colors of Princeton, but I went to Princeton. I love it. I lived in F. Scott Fitzgerald's room at Princeton. I lived in, it was a little hall. Anybody from Princeton? Raise your hand. No? Too bad. Little hall. Where did you live?
No, I just have to visit Princeton.
Oh, well, come on. I thought you went to Princeton. What did you went to? You went to Princeton. You went to see it. You're trying to get it out of here. I lived in Fitzgerald's room. And Fitzgerald, when he was at Princeton, was kind of a muto. He only got B or C in his classes. He didn't know very much about art. He wasn't a very good student. He wrote for the theater. Fitzgerald, when he was in New York, was a good writer, but not a great writer. But this is what happened. Fitzgerald went to Paris, and something happened. When he was only 24 years old, 25 years old, 26 years old, he was in Paris. What happened? Anybody play sports? When you play sports, no, maybe not, right? When you play sports and you play against a professional, when I play against professionals, like the Rangers or TV, or the Islanders, I play so much better. I'm faster, I'm stronger. They make me play better because I'm playing against somebody really good. It's like playing ping pong against somebody really, really good, right? Then the next day you play ping pong against your grandma. It's so good. He has been playing ping pong against mutos in New York. Then he was playing ping pong with the greatest in Paris and in MP. And it brought his game up to this level. And then he wrote The Great Gatsby, his masterpiece, with the most wonderful sentence ever written by an American. The final sentence of The Great Gatsby. I'll buy you a t-shirt if you didn't remember it. Yeah, it was like the green light, Sino-vision, very good. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. As a kid who was your age, wrote that. A Megoran who was your age. My lecturer, my teacher, not too far from here, was a guy named Alfred Kazin. Oh, Kazin hated F. Scott Fitzgerald. He hated Princeton. I think he hated me. he was a very, very New York guy. He said, I hate Princeton, I hate Fitzgerald and all those cocktails, but I'll tell you one thing, Charlie. You know, it's wonderful when your teacher tells you something really, really confidential, right? He said, I'll tell you one thing. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote the greatest sentence written by any American ever. It's that last sentence of The Great Gatsby. So he did it when he was in Paris. There's Zelda, the pretty wife. Also, Fangza. Really crazy. She was painting when they were a little bit later. This is actually a little in the 1930s. She was a painter, and that's the cool thing about these guys too. They were writers and they were also painters. So you're still wondering, when am I going to get to Pan? Oh, good. Does Josephine Baker need to know? I wonder if she was ever in this building. Josephine Baker was a Heiren from St. Louis, a jazz dancer, singer, and when she got, people knew her in Harlem. I like this picture. Maybe some of you don't like it. Sorry. I like it. When she was in Harlem, she was pretty famous. But when she went to Paris, she took off her clothes. And she became unbelievably famous. And also, it was an example, by the way, of that thing that I was talking about before, censorship here. Why go to Paris? Because in Paris, you could show everything. in Paris you could be yourself. She became a huge star in Paris. Camera de Lampica, I'll go quicker. This is Lampica. She was a Russian, actually very sexy Russian, who painted Art Deco paintings. Anybody know her work? I'll keep going. That's Lampica, that's one of her self-portraits, and a Bugatti, that's cool. You know, in the springtime, I gave you all cards so you could come for free. In the springtime, at my beautiful museum, which is like a Gatsby mansion, on Cheongdao, near where Fitzgerald lived, I'm going to have a show of the Jazz Age. All these paintings that you see, and many more beautiful ones, will be in my show. I invite you to the opening. We're going to have a hell of a good party. Lots and lots of wine, lots of champagne, and lots of good music and lots of jazz music. Come in the spring. It'll be in April on Long Island. Come as my guest. She'll be in that show. That's Mr. Duke. Now, I'll go very quickly. Do you know the name Cunard? Ever been on a cruise? A Cunard cruise? Queen Mary? Queen Elizabeth? No? Cunard is a famous cruise line. She was a very, very rich girl named Nancy, and very, very pretty. Everybody took her picture. You know, maybe I'll go quickly with the Cunard line. She was Nancy Cunard. And she was in Paris too. Her boyfriends, get ready, this is her boyfriends, T.S. Eliot. You know the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock? Probably written for Nancy. Ezra Pound, famous poet. Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett was her boyfriend. Part of Waiting for Godot is addressed to her. This is Tristan Tzara. This is the way every boy came to her. Like this. But everybody knows her. Michael Arlen, who wrote this about her, and then Garbo played her in a movie called A Woman of Affairs, but she was Diana. Later on, she preferred African Americans. She liked the jazz guys. This was her, and her mommy was not so pleased, by the way. But she became, there she is, she's running a printing press where she was publishing books, including, she was the first ever to publish Samuel Beckett. A really, really interesting woman, a very wild woman. When she was even a teenager in London, she was part of the corrupt coterie. She's part of this whole thing, freedom. They went to Paris for freedom, to fool around, to have some fun, and then to write. I'll go quickly. We'll go quickly, because we want to get to Pan. Another one is a young Yo Tairan, little nice Jewish girl from Brooklyn named Anna Walinska, who is studying here on 57th Street at the Art Students League, and every teacher said, you want to keep going, you have to go to Paris. And she was 19 years old, and she goes to Paris, and her first day in Paris, I'm not making it up, because I know her niece. She said the first day in Paris, she sits at a cafe table, and who the hell does she meet? God, Marlon. She meets Picasso. Picasso sits down. Of course, Picasso's looking for a pretty girl. Sits down right at her cafe table, and she draws Picasso. And then she goes and she paints wonderful paintings, looking a little bit there like Matisse, a little bit there like Laurencin. Now, what I'd like you to do, is those of you who enjoy painting, take a look at what she was doing, because it's going to remind you of a Chinese painter. Say your name. Finally. I know it took a while, but what I wanted you to do is understand this. Mayborin, Spanish people, British people, all going to Paris very much for the same thing. Freedom, artistic expression, and to just be where the party was, right? So who's Pan? Now, somebody knows. Go ahead. Help us out. You know that she's from Antwerp. Anybody else from Antwerp? Shama! That's great! She's from Antwerp province. She was from a very, very poor family. And you know the rest?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, let's hear it. Go ahead.
And she was from what called the play.
Good.
And the one that saved her from
Mr. Pan.
Yeah.
Good.
Saved her. And the only one like Chen Show in their
Saved her from what?
Chen Show in their wedding.
Ah, good. Very good.
And she that time and she was in the school in Shanghai.
Good.
And the school kicked him out.
Good.
Then she goes to there.
What was she before she was saved? Yeah. We don't want to say it, but it's true, right? Although one biographer says, maybe not. Maybe she was just sort of saved by Mr. Pan. And Mr. Pan said, I want you to learn how to read and write. And I want you to do something that you feel is creative. Do you remember what she remembered? The only thing she remembered about her mommy was what? Her mommy would do what? We call it embroidery. Yeah, you know? Embroidery. Say again? 繡花. So she remembered mommy doing 繡花. She remembered mommy drawing it. She remembered mommy doing the embroidery, right? So when it came time for her to sort of blossom and do something intellectually under Mr. Pan, who saved her from being a prostitute, because she was only 13, 14 years old, she started to draw and she started to paint. And guess what? I think this is so exciting, right? She was a natural. You know what I mean by natural? What does it mean? How do you say natural in Chinese? Just, she just, huh? Tiancheng, oh, I see, Tian, like from heaven. Tiancheng, like Picasso. Like Picasso. I mean, even before anybody said, this is how you draw the figure, this is how you draw the still life, this is how you learn it, she was a natural. So, she's the first, and this is, by the way, when she's in Paris, she's the first Chinese ever, the first Chinese, I should say, first Chinese woman ever to get a scholarship from the government to go to Paris, Papa. And then when she gets to Paris, do you remember this part? She has to take, there's her passport. Isn't that cool? Of course, later on, I'm going to show you a picture of Gong. There's a movie made with Gong Li. Yeah. She doesn't look like Gong Li. It's too bad. Okay, cut it out. Stop it, boys. Stop it, boys. She gets to Paris on a government scholarship. At first, she went to, I think it was Lyon, but then later on, she took the examination to get into the École des Beaux-Arts. Now, the École des Beaux-Arts in 1921, and the École des Beaux-Arts in 1821, and even the École des Beaux-Arts now. Does anybody know about this place? You know Juilliard, right? You know how hard it is to get into Juilliard? You know how many times you got to do this? To get to Juilliard, you got to be really, really good. You're going to talk to me about Shanghai Conservatory, right? But to get into these schools, to get into the école, you had to draw unbelievably well, almost like photographically well. You had to do some sculpture, you had to do it fast. She painted so well that she got right into the École des Beaux-Arts. And I don't want you to think, and here we go, right? Oh, wait, don't get ahead of it. I don't want you to think that that's easy. I want you to understand that that's like getting into Juilliard. That's like getting into Shanghai Conservatory, Beijing Conservatory if you're a musician. That is hard. She was terrific. She was absolutely fantastic. Later on, she won a big award in Paris, and she went to Rome as well. She was an absolutely brilliant painter and draftsman. When she gets to Paris, though, there are other Chinese people in Paris. You and I already started this, right? One of them was Xu. 你知道不知道? Xu Beihong. Guess what? I was walking here from my apartment. I see a store called Ma. And what is that? Ma, a horse by Xu Beihong. I'm going to the right place today. Xu Beihong, you know, right? Right? What the hell? Excuse me, I didn't say what the hell. What the hell was he doing in Paris? I ask you this. Yeah. He's in Paris. Like Pan Yu Liang, who drawn, by the way, from Anhui to Nanjing to Shanghai. He was from Shanghai, did it? Xu Beihong, Shanghai, right? And he gets to Paris, and he is also at the École des Beaux-Arts. 中国好，加油，加油, right? Who are these bloody Chinese who are doing so well in Paris? And why are they in Paris, by the way? I know about Pan a little bit. We're going to get to it in a second. Pan was restricted when she lived in Nanjing and in Shanghai. She was restricted. She wanted to draw the body, and they did not let her. In fact, they protested when she had an exhibition that showed the beautiful body of the girls that she drew in a bathhouse. But what was Xu Beihong doing there, and who else was there? How about this? 你知道不知道? Fu Lei. Oh, what do you know? You're a volunteer. You have to volunteer some information. Really interesting guy. Who's his son? Fu Tong. Wow. his daughter a little bit. What else do you know about Foulet? Good. Louder? Yeah, when he was a wonderful writer, Pedro Foulet. Really interesting writer. Also hung around in the studio of Rodin. We were just talking about my Rodin book. That seems like yesterday. When I was writing about Rodin and why Chinese people know about Rodin, Foulet was in Rodin's studio and writing about Rodin. Brilliant. Do you know about Foulet? You know about Fouton? No? Yes? No? Okay. Who else was in Paris? Look! Tamad! Joy Lai! What is he doing there? Same time. E-J-O-R-E, what is he doing there? Good. Study abroad. Remember when President Mitterrand came to Beijing? There was Premier Joe and there was Mitterrand en français. On dit le français absolument parfait. Beautiful, beautiful accent, Parisian accent, Premier Joe. But you know, we can make this a different kind of lecture, right, PG? What were these guys doing there? Because guess who his roommate was in Paris? Go. Somebody. Very short. Very hard. That's right. That's how he. Ha! That's the actual size. Hey, you laugh. In 1984, you would go to jail for laughing at that joke. Deng Xiaoping, 16岁, 18岁, he's in Paris. His roommate, his brother, Guga, was Zhou Enlai, Premier Zhou. And we could have a long conversation, right? What are these guys doing? I mean, I know what Foulet was doing. He was a scholar, he was a writer. I know what Xu Beihong is doing. He's a painter. But what the hell are those guys doing? They were running a magazine. Actually, they were running a magazine. This one I think is almost as interesting as Pan Yu Liang. And his name is now called San Yu. Look at his paintings. Whoa. Now we're talking about the body, right? And look at this one. They call him the Chinese Matisse. Because who's in Paris? Matisse is also in Paris. What's he doing? He's the Chinese Matisse. Isn't this cool? Think about all these, I want to say lucky Chinese, but think about all these Chinese people in Paris at the same time. And among them, this brave and wonderful woman. Her name is Pan Yu Liang. And as I was saying before, she wanted to learn how to be a great artist. She wanted to learn how to be a great painter, right? She came to Paris to learn how to draw the figure and the body and the techniques of oil painting. Because when you think about it, right? Well, we Chinese, we're not painting with oil. What are we painting in? We Chinese are usually painting with what? Yeah, ink, water, paper. This is oil on canvas. Her teacher already, am I right? In Shanghai, her teacher had already said, try oil. But the problem also was she wanted to do, this is, by the way, this one, the beautiful color here is what in English we would call apricot. And in Chinese, the word I think is qing, with good fortune. That was her like lucky color. That was her lucky color. She loved that color. If anybody here like art history? No? Nobody? A little bit, Sino-Vision? Who does it remind you a little bit of? It's a Faberin. A great Faberin painter. Oh, who is just a little bit before that. Say it? Say it? Louder. Yeah, I'm thinking that there's a little Matisse in that painting. Now I want to teach you a little bit about art. Matisse was doing something similar to that, especially with the flowers. But the striped blouse, right? The pattern of it and the way she painted herself in that textile was very like a man named Vuillard. If we had a chalkboard, that's what it should be called. Chalkboard, damn it. No, I mean, just give me a pen, I'll write it on the wall. I won't. It would be Vuillard, a very, very great post-impressionist painter like Van Gogh, like Gauguin, Vuillard. So she's looking, I guess what I'm trying to teach you is this. You're in Paris. You're where Picasso is, you're where Matisse is, but what are you also probably doing almost every day? You're going to what? Drink? Actually, she did. I'm sure she was drinking because look at this painting. This is Pan Yu Liang after an art opening. Right? Also, what are you doing every day, probably, if you're in Paris? If you're not in school, in the studio, drawing, painting, where do you go? You go to museums, you go to galleries, you go to shows, you see Matisse, you see Picasso, you see Delacroix, you see, this is Paris, chaps. Then you see the Louvre, right? You go to the Luxembourg, you go to the Musée d'Orsay, right? Not up and down. Who's been to Paris? Raise your paw. Let's just go after this. Let's go to Kennedy Airport and go to Paris together, right? You know the museums? That was her school. Now, you know, and don't get offended, could she have learned to paint like this if she had stayed in Nanjing or Shanghai? Same thing, right? I'm not, because I made fun of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who is so limited, such a Shangbaar in Great Neck, in Changdao. And then he goes to Paris and he becomes the author of The Great Gatsby. Could Pan have become Pan in Nanjing? My answer is probably your answer, which is no. So there she is. This is, by the way, one of the other artists that I think influenced her, Marie Laurencin. And this is a portrait of somebody who else was in my book and is going to be in my exhibition when I have it at the museum. Who is that a portrait of? I'll give you a free t-shirt if you get it right. Coco? Yeah, that's Chanel. Yeah. Isn't that cool? She was there too. Just so you know, all those people I showed you before, Chanel was always there because Chanel was doing the sets and the costumes for the balleters. Is that cool? So here's another person that Pan Yu Liang would have known really well and known her work. Marie Laurencin, she probably knew her personally. And then look at something like this. This is by Pan. This is by Pan Yu Liang. First I could ask you this. Who does it remind you of? A little bit of a man named Redon, not Rodin. Redon, you see this blue? You can't. Jiggle that. See this blue? You can't. See that? Look. Also look. Nigga. See? Yeah? Check it. See? You can't. Do you see it? What is she doing? In my opinion, she's absorbing all these great influences. She sees, then she paints. She sees, and then she paints. And I think she's learning from each one of these people. There's a little bit, by the way, when I look at this, there's a little bit of what Picasso was doing at the same time. Picasso realist. A little bit. Do you agree or not? You can disagree. You're a painter? No. I'm favorite. You a painter? Yeah? Do you see a little Picasso or no? Maybe not. Okay, later. Let's go. Now here comes the part about Pan that maybe you already know. Pan, like many painters, paints from the nude. That's how you learn. I'm starting a class at my museum. I think on Monday it starts. First time we've had classes in a long time. And one of our classes is going to be called figure drawing or life drawing. Do you understand? Figure drawing or life drawing is going to be a model, and then the artists are going to draw. And I'm probably going to be in the class too. Sorry, no, I won't. You're not supposed to do that. I'm the museum director. But one of the most important things you do when you're an artist, to learn how to draw, to learn how to paint, is you draw from the life, from the nude. When Pan was living, first in Nanjing, then in Shanghai, before she went to Paris, she got in trouble. For drawing from the nude, right? I don't know. I don't want to get anybody mad at me, right? But this reminds me a little bit of when I lived in China in 1984, and we knew, by the way, that there were live models down in the art building, and there were dirty boys looking through the windows all the time. But boy, the art students had the worst possible reputation. This was a Hebei Shima Hebei Shida. By the way, we had a very famous painter doing some of these painting. Yue Minzhen. Yue Minzhen was in Shida. Did you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was in Shida when I was in Shida, right? But she got in trouble. She got in so much trouble in China that's one of the reasons why she was happy to leave. Then, do you know the rest of the story? Because it really is sad. Who knows the rest of the story about Pan Yu Liang? Because this is a little sad. You do, of course. You want to talk? You don't want to talk. Okay, chaps. Pan Yu Liang in the 1920s was already famous back home in Nanjing and in Shanghai. Xu Beihong had written home and said, guess what? Pan is killing it here. Pan is crushing it. She's winning awards. Everybody says she's one of the most talented painters in all of Paris. So Pan is invited to come home. I'm going to get a little choked up when I think about what happens next. Pan is invited to come back home. And she's invited to show some of her paintings. First in Nanjing, and then in Shanghai. And when she showed, it wasn't this painting, but it was a painting of a male nude, right? First thing, Mr. Pan, her husband, said, I divorce you. I'm going back to my wife. He had another wife. Very convenient, he had another wife. Right? So I'm done. Also, right outside the gallery, there were people banging on the door. They were breaking the windows. They were holding signs, degenerate art. And it hurt her terribly. You can imagine, right? So exciting to come back home. She became a teacher there. She was going to teach Chinese kids how to draw the way she'd been taught in France. She wanted to just teach what oil painting was about, how to paint from the figure. All she wanted to do was bring back to China what she had learned. Does that sound familiar to some of you? I bet it does a little bit, right? I know I have friends who have come to the United States, who have studied at Goddard or Princeton or Yale, and often they say to me, all I want to do, Charlie, is go back home to China and bring back home what I learned, be a part of what happens in China next. So she goes back home and they protest. And they call her bad names, slut. And then she said, I'm leaving. I'm leaving China. I'm going back to Paris, and I'm never going to see. It's the nude. Big deal. Is this? I'm sorry, but I have to ask. Do Chinese people never take their clothes off? How are there so many Chinese people? It's the nude. It's the nude. But they couldn't take it. So she goes back to Paris, and guess what? She never returned to China again. She never went back to China again. She became, in a way, not just an expatriate. Oh, this is such a beautiful painting. This is very similar. Cézanne. Look at Cézanne. Look at Pan. But this is Pan. What a great artist. What a wonderful artist. But what a story. This is, by the way, another of Pan Yu Liang's paintings. And I'm going to ask you, when Pan Yu Liang went back to Paris in 1929, a few years later, if you call her hometown now Nanjing, what happened? I'm getting choked up. What happened? It's Nanjing. Maybe you're too young? You guys too young? You too young?
No.
You know what happened in Nanjing?
Like 300,000 people was
He's
killed.
got it. We call it the Nanjing Massacre is what we call it in English. Can you imagine how it felt to be in Paris and reading newspapers and hearing and seeing in pictures, because there were pictures of what the Japanese were doing in Nanjing, seeing what was happening back in your hometown? You know how it feels, right? Some of you have come from China, you read about life, but imagine being in New York and something like that happening to your hometown. Anybody from Nanjing? Nobody from Nanjing? Oh yeah, Li Ji. Nanjing is this beautiful city with the beautiful boulevards, the plane trees, Dada, bookstores, this beautiful, beautiful city. And it was being destroyed. And Pan had decided that she would never go back to China again. My God, that must have been so hard. That must have been so difficult to have been. And she was in Paris and she's painting beautiful paintings, and she's kind of famous, but she's not really doing well economically. Not many people are buying her paintings, so she's really in exile. Sometimes I don't think it's here. Sometimes she would put a message in when she signed her work. Oh, this is back to Picasso. Oh, I see. I want to show you this. Look at this is Pan Yu Liang, and this is Picasso's portrait of his wife. Isn't that interesting? I think Pan knew this portrait. This is 1917, and Pan did hers. But now back to all this. But I want you to feel with me a little bit what it must have been like to be a Chinese, wonderful, talented painter, not very wealthy, but living in Paris at the same time that your city is being destroyed. And then never really feeling as though you can go back again. Because when you go back again, whether they're jealous or they hate you for wanting to draw, something like this, they just wouldn't let her live in peace in Nanjing or Shanghai. You get it? Any comments? Let's talk about it later, maybe. Now I've just ruined the mood. Everybody wanted to come to a Jazz Age lecture, how wonderful it was, and how much fun Pan Yu Liang was having in Paris. But to me, the bravery of this artist, I love it. And by the way, if you look at Pan's work like that, and then you look at Mary Cassatt, you know that she must have been looking at Mary Cassatt. Those of you who came to see some art, this is a really, really interesting artist absorbing many great French artists, this is an American artist named Cassatt. That's Pan. That's Cassatt, that's Pan. You get it? Boy, she learned a lot. And in 1977, when Pan Yu Liang died, alone, no hubby, in Paris, and on her grave was "Forever and ever toward the Jade Passage." That was the inscription in Chinese. I wish I knew how to say it in Chinese. Forever and ever going toward the Jade Passage. She was essentially a wonderful but not well-known painter in Paris who had made that courageous journey from Nanjing to Paris. I love this one, by the way. That's a fascinating painting, right? What's interesting about that one? Two girls, that doesn't mean two girls doesn't mean, two girls doesn't mean that. The one is holding up a mask. Yeah, there's a little bit of Japanese mask there. I think it's also a Chinese mask, but a Japanese mask. I was wondering about that too. Almost always, Pan would paint Zhongguoren, Urban or Heiran when she was in Paris. She almost rarely painted anybody else. Almost always that. So guess what? Pan Yu Liang is now kind of famous, right? This is an opera that was created about Pan Yu Liang's life. This is Gong Li. All right. Sorry. Gong Li did a movie about Pan. There was also a TV series. Of course, ever watch Gong Li movies? Anybody like to watch? Of course. Every time there's a Gong Li movie, right? What does she have to do? She has to go crazy and lose her temper. Well, I'm looking around, making sure nobody loses her temper behind me, and smash things on the floor. It's always like ceramics. If I ever invited Gong Li to my house, which would be a lot of fun, beforehand I would put my mother's teacups away and all my porcelain away, because Gong Li's always throwing things on the floor. Well, in the movie about Pan, she destroys her studio, tears up all her canvases in a rage. It's a great scene for Gong Li. Fantastic, what a beautiful woman. Doesn't look at all like Pan. Oh, here's a little irony. Maybe we should end on this. Are you comfortable in your church? Oh, we should have a discussion after this. So here's the irony. Ready? 你知道不知道刘一强 Yeah, you know about him? What was his job? Catcher.
He used to be a catcher.
That's right! Have you ever interviewed him?
No, but...
The girl from the New Yorker interviewed him. She was very nasty. There's a very nasty article in the New Yorker about him. He was a taxi driver. And now is a billionaire, right? And I think this is ironic. Irony. Irony, right? Funny. Funny. Right? Here comes Funza. Why did Pan never go back to China? Because she painted the nude. Because she didn't want to be attacked for painting the nude. So look at this. This is Modigliani, who by the way is from Paris. And I think Pan's paintings look a lot like Modigliani. This is a nude. And it's a pretty nude. It's a hot nude. It's not a nice little nude. There's a lot to look at. Right? So what does Liu do? He spends $172 million at Christie's, not far from here, on this painting, which I saw is a great Modigliani painting. And the first thing he does is he takes it back to Shanghai, and what's he going to put it in? A huge museum that he built It's going to be the #1 most fantastic painting in a huge museum that he's building in Shanghai. And that, is what I call irony. That this, in 2017, this is measured, but in 1927, this is like, no way, Jose. That's Chinese, no way, Jose. Right? That was the night that it sold. I saw this painting, by the way. This painting was phenomenal. It's an absolute masterpiece. Whoever his advisors are, they really told him to get a very great painting. And that's basically that's my story. Wang Qing, Wang Question and comment? Yes.
Just a quick question, because you mentioned that by the time she was pretty famous, why there's no one purchasing her work?
Yeah, good question, right? Why now? Because I know I want to have a Pan Yu Liang. Why then were they not purchasing her work the way, for instance, Xu Beihong? Beihong was pretty well known. People bought his work. You know that, right? And especially Chinese people were buying Xu Beihong. Why? And San Yu, pretty well known. He made a good living. Why not Pan? Well, Pan was also the one part about the movie about Pan Yu Liang is this: Pan was really bad. Had a really bad temper. She had a terrible temper, and I don't think people could deal with her that much. So that's part of it. Do you know more? You seem to know more.
Well, anecdotally, I heard majority of her works were destroyed on its way to China in a cargo ship.
China. Is it?
Out of fire, I think.
I didn't know that. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
that was on
I didn't know that. Because if you want to see Pan Yu Liang's work, well, you could come to my museum in the spring. I'm going to borrow some. But the best place to see Pan's work is where? Did you know? Beijing. In the Anhui Museum in Beijing. They've got some selection of it. But when you go, there are no nudes. No, there are no nudes when you go. I think her best works are the nudes. But when you go to Beijing, Anhui Museum, all you're going to see are like the Cézanne ones. Yeah, let me just, still life. But I mean, if I can just play professor for a second, the best painting by Pan Yu Liang that you saw today was that nude early on. Not that one, that one. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. That is a Modigliani nude, that is a Matisse nude, that is a really, really powerful painting. If you want to know why, I'll tell you something about the color. The color comes from Matisse and Gauguin and Van Gogh. The line, that comes from Laurencin, that comes from her training. When I was telling you before that she was technically one of the best painters in Paris, I wasn't goofing around. Do you see that line, that beautiful serpentine line? Watch my finger. E-R-Sen. You know, serpentine. You know, just that wonderful serpentine line. That's the kind of line that Picasso, Matisse, Modigliani, Laurencin, that's that wonderful line of beauty. And she was fantastic at it. It's just like a pianist who could play a good legato. That's a legato line. She was a great painter of the nude. But you won't find it in Beijing. I'm going to try to get this one and bring it to my museum and have it for the show. 欢迎欢迎. I want you all to feel free to come to my beautiful museum. It's a beautiful park. It's a mansion, Great Gatsby kind of mansion in Changdao. And in April, we'll have a hell of a good party for a lot of Chinese people. And we're going to introduce New York, and we're going to introduce Americans to the work of Pan Yu Liang. Any more questions or comments? Good questions, good comments, sir.
So was she famous when she was still alive, or who discovered her?
Yeah, well, who discovered her? I'm going to give a little bit of the credit to Xu Beihong, but also her first teacher, whose name also was Liu, and he was back in Shanghai. And then when she was in Paris, Handel ran many painters said, that Chinese woman, she's got something. Just the way they said it about Xu Beihong and they said it about San Yu. These guys, just so you feel proud to be Chinese, these guys were really admired among French painters and artists. Foulet also was admired as a writer, right? We could go through the list. And Premier Joe and Deng Xiaoping. So she was, in her time, she was famous among artists, not a big deal in the galleries or the museums. And then later on, I guess what's very interesting for me right now is looking at your faces and wondering, do you know anything about this wonderful artist? Do you know anything about this interesting generation of Chinese writers, intellectuals who went to Paris? Or is this foreign to you? Because I know everybody in this room probably remembers Lu Xun. Lu Xun went to Japan, right? And Guo Moreau went to Japan. These guys went out of China to develop their intellects. But this was this group that went to Paris. And then maybe we could have another lecture someday about the ones who came to New York. Like you. And I'm just going to say it. I so admire the courage of the people in this room. You came to New York to study, to work. It's a big, big decision. I know. I made the same decision to go to China at one point. It was so strange. It was so different. But I came back home. Pan went to Paris, knowing that the second time she went to Paris, she knew she was never going to go back home. That's probably not the case for any of you in this room. But it's a very big choice. I really admire you for making that choice, for doing as well as you have in New York. One of the reasons I came today, to say that. And I'm going to add something to it. I've taught for many, many years. I'm really old. I'm 100. And I taught for a long time at City University. And it was so-so, mama hoo-hoo, right? My students, not so great. Some were very good, but not all my students were good. And then I taught for 1 year, 1 year in China. And I still to this day say the greatest students I ever had as a teacher, as a professor, the greatest students, the ones thirsty for knowledge, the ones who really would do the work, but also the ones who understood the importance of a masterpiece of literature or a masterpiece of music were my Chinese students. I have never had students like that in America, ever. Ever. And if I did, maybe it would be just the Chinese were in my class. Any more questions or comments? Yeah, let's go.
Well, this is mostly a comment rather than
Go ahead.
a question.
Yeah.
I was thinking right now we have made so much progress. Cultural taboos that used to be really in place, like the taboo about female nudes, is no longer like we just look at this and we don't think it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But we still have so much burden that's still placed upon us.
I agree.
I was mostly talking about this thing that I learned yesterday. Recently, there's a poet named Ropicourt or something
What's his name again?
Ropicourt. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but she's from Canada, of Indian origin. She writes poem, and it's got like pretty feminist and bestsellers. But she once posted a picture on her Instagram featuring female menstrual blood, and it was censored. Yeah. And there was some kind of controversy about that. Sure. So it's mostly a comment saying, hey, it has been 80 years and on, and there are still cultural taboos about body parts that's just people don't like.
And you can't, listen, a whole other lecture. It's called the lecture on censorship. And you understand, and I'm so glad you brought this up. When I point a finger at Nanjing or Shanghai and say they drove out poor Pan Yu Liang, or I make fun of Shijiazhuang. Oh, what a city. It was so tight, so conservative. I'm talking about a place where it'd be hard to be an artist. Yemen Zhang, he left. We could talk forever about Ai Weiwei. You know, there's no place for an artist in a place where that kind of censorship is there, except for one place, and maybe we could talk about this too. Ai Weiwei is a terrific artist because he knows how to write in symbolic code, secret code. He knows, his father knew this too, I think. They know, when you have a censor coming down on you, you learn to lie. You learn to write using symbols. You learn to say something that means something else and use irony, for instance. But here comes my next part of this, which is this. All this about artistic expression, and by the way, even this, when I was goofing around, these two notes, those two blue notes, that drove some people crazy in New York. They thought there was something degenerate about that. So New York that's the funny thing about today's class, right? New York was the place of censorship in the 20s. Then China, and China, you know, we could talk about China today. I watched Xi Jinping give his 4-hour speech. Oh my God. Right? But you know too, at any minute in China, Mr. Liu, who has this on his wall, this fantastic painting that he paid $172 million for, any moment they could come, Xi Jinping could just say, hey, too sexy, too Western, take it down. And if they did, he'd have to take it down. There's no argument here, right? You're going to take it down. This happens, and then we could add to this, because 我是美国人, at any moment, this country also. A lot of people worried about this country and Washington. I think, by the way, in this country, now we're in a different lecture. It's called censorship. One of the reasons why it won't happen in this country is that court, the Supreme Court, they love the First Amendment. And you, Sino-Vision, and me, you and me, actually this is really cool. I'd love to have a real argument with you about this. You and I, we understand the First Amendment. We're journalists. We're journalists. Maybe so much not you as me, by the way. But you know, when I was in Time Inc., the First Amendment, that was my thing. But no art world is really going to thrive when there's that kind of censorship. She had to get out of Nanjing, right? And Hemingway had to get out of New York. And Fitzgerald, they had to go where they were free. They had that freedom. Some people, by the way, would say they had too much freedom. You know? That Fitzgerald drank himself to death. Nancy Cunard drank herself to death. Hart Crane ends up with suicide. Hemingway ends up with suicide. Yeah, a lot of suicide. They were so free, you know, that it cost them some too. Any more comments? I love your comments. It's cool.
Well, if I want to follow up,
yeah, follow up.
If I just wanted to follow up, if you're talking
It's a
about
salon, right?
if you're talking about censorship, but there's the important distinction to be made, which is censorship placed upon by the government, by the state, versus censorship placed by societal norms.
That's great. That's great. That's brilliant. So which is it in China?
It's both.
Got it? Which is it? Is it what your parents are going to say, so don't paint that anymore? Or is it what the government's going to say?
Both.
It's both. It's a good one, right? Comments?
Yeah,
Yeah, come on. That's great, by the way. I owe you a beer. Never mind the t-shirt. Yeah, go ahead. It's a great comment. Yeah, I think it's on. You're on.
It's an interesting topic. And
It is,
to follow. Can you tell us more about this politicizing female body parts as a special thing? I mean, I was watching this short video talking about the history of women showing their breasts. Basically, what my takeaway of that video was this whole taboo only started after a certain age. So before that, it was okay and it was kind of encouraged for female to show their breasts as a sign of fertility or like of life, basically.
Yeah.
But that thing, and today, like in the US, we talk about abortion as a political question.
Jesus.
For men to talk about that.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So, when did this whole thing start that we use female body parts as a political weapon?
I'm telling you, that's a great point. I'm telling you, I think that's part of the answer. Isn't that cool? This period, that pun, this period of art and music and shows, this is when Josephine Baker broke that taboo. And then, you know, the movies came along too and did some of that. There were nudes. There were always opportunities. If you wanted to go to the Louvre and see a nude body, you would see a nude. Even the kids would. But I think this is one of the biggest answers I could give you to this. And that was one of the reasons why we joke around and talk about, oh, Josephine Baker. You know, Hemingway once danced with Josephine Baker at a club, and she was wearing a fur coat. And Hemingway thought, what is she wearing a fur coat? But then he realized, underneath the fur coat, mayo. Josephine Baker was really, really proud of this beautiful body, and she almost made a statement in Paris in the 1920s about, I am going to, and when she did it on stage, she wore a banana skirt, but then at a certain point, she'd take everything off. And the French, maybe we should give a little credit to the French. I'm up here saying how great Chinese people are. Maybe we should give a little credit to the French. The French had the Folie Bergère during the time of Toulouse-Lautrec, and they were topless. 没事儿，没事儿. French said that's no problem. Beautiful women, beautiful breasts, 没关系. And Americans would go on, and Americans would say, wow, come on, they're not wearing anything. But the French were already there in a way. But I would say Josephine Baker is a big part of it. Great comments, what a great salon. That's a really, really interesting group of people. Who else has a comment? Huh? Oh, please, let's have it.
Wondering about the gender equality in Paris. Because Xiangyu is the name.
Good.
And most of the artists we know.
Xiangyu, yeah.
Yeah.
And Beihong.
Yeah, so could you...
And Fouret.
Right.
What do you think? Before I answer. What do you think?
I think we always say that this artist is a female. We always have this 女艺术家, right? We always have this female before the artist. We will emphasize this is a female artist. That's because it's not equal. Yeah. So
no, I think you're right. So guess what? I think you're right. Xu Beihong, you know, did very well, very successful. Pan Yu Liang, not so much. Right? Marie Laurencin, you saw, wonderful artist. Pablo Picasso, Henri Matisse. It's still boys. And if you want, because I would love to say she would be equal to anybody, but they treated her just kind of like a very pretty girl who takes her clothes off all the time. Even when you go to Gertrude Stein's house. Ready? I feel like I know these guys, right? Mr. Zhao was saying, I talk like I knew them. I feel like I lived there. I knew them. And Woody Allen knows this in the movie Midnight in Paris. And Woody Allen, by the way, is going to come and play jazz at my museum. And I have a jazz. Yeah, I'm working on it. Isn't that cool? he plays the clarinet. But you go to Gertrude Stein's house in Paris, and here comes Hemingway and Hemingway Furen. So go sit over there and drink tea. Here comes Fitzgerald and Fitzgerald Furen, sit over there, and Bouchard. Now, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Picasso, they're drinking, with Gertrude Stein, who's like a man. But all the wives at Gertrude Stein, and remember, Gertrude Stein considered to be the great feminist. I mean, what the hell? Gertrude Stein is a famous feminist. But no. When you go to Gertrude Stein's house, Furen, you sit over there. Boys, you come over here. We talk about literature. We talk about art. That's interesting, right? So not quite. I'm not going to pretend this is quite equal. Sylvia Beach, she was the publisher of James Joyce. Many of them were lesbians, by the way. Juna Barnes, many of them were famous lesbians that were part of this, but none of them became James Joyce or Hemingway or Fitz. Zelda is a great example. We could have a whole lecture about Zelda. Zelda went crazy, partly because of this. She felt like Scott Fitzgerald was always coming saying, I'm the famous one. Sit down. Chinsoba. I'm the famous one in the family. I write the books. You sit down. So it's a wonderful question. But in the 1920s, as great as my period is when it comes to freedom and equality, not quite there. Not quite there. This is a long way before feminism. And don't think Gertrude Stein was the big feminist that you've read about. Gertrude Stein was really nasty to some very great women writers, and she was really nasty to Hemingway's wonderful wife. Her name was Hadley. Yeah. Any more questions or comments? This is marvelous. I love a salon. Comments. Come on, you know so much about art. Tell me about art. Tell me why these Chinese were in Paris from your point of view. Why did Premier Zhou go to Paris and Deng Xiaoping? Who knows this one? John, you wanna? Yeah, go.
I know.
Yeah, you know, go.
I know, like Premier Zhou, like when he was in Japan, he felt horrible about his Japanese. So he took a scholar from Nankai, high school, which is
Nankai.
Yeah,
Tianjin.
Yeah, 6,000 franc per year. So he lives very wealthy, and he didn't study at all when he was in Paris. So he, yeah, that's true. And so he published a magazine, and involved into the Communist Party. So when he like returned to China, even he was very young, he was not nominated as like leader in the Jiangsu province.
Jiangsu.
Yeah, Jiangsu. Oh no, Guangzhou. And so that's why he became very familiar, well known with Zhejiang dish.
Very good. What's your name?
Quinn or Lincoln.
Very well done. And maybe you know, 你知道不知道, Deng Xiaoping in Chongqing had already learned French. Deng Xiaoping when he was back home, Chongqing, Sichuan province. Yeah. So I just picturing French with a Sichuan accent. When he got to, and he was a very young guy. I think when this picture is taken, he's only Sholiusbai. And he was a very young guy, and he had to work when he got to France. He was studying language, but he had to work. And Premier Zhou was not, he was studying too, and they were running a magazine, an anarchist magazine, Red Light called, Hongshma, Red Light, something, I don't know what that would be in Chinese. Hong something. Anyway, it's kind of an interesting story, right? Yeah. What I find fascinating about this is, here she is, Pan Yu Liang, and Xu Beihong, and Fu Lei, by the way, who I think is a really, really brilliant guy. And his son, Fu Song, was a very great pianist. I don't know if you've ever heard of his recordings. The one who married the daughter of Menuhin, he was a great Chopin and Liszt pianist. But they were there too, and they brought home to China Fu Lei, but you know the end of Fu Lei, that story, right? Oh God, now I'm gonna really depress you. Do you remember the Cultural Revolution?
Yeah.
And Fu Lei goes back home. And Fu Lei goes back home the way Pan Yu Liang went back home. I'm going to take what I learned in Paris and I'm going to teach my fellow Chinese. And what did they do with bloody red guards? Don't get me started. I hate this like with a passion. What did they do? They criticized him. They beat him. His wife as well. And then finally one day, yeah, Fu Lei, Fu Ren, mutual suicide, committed suicide together. Took a poison, went to sleep. That was it. Couldn't take it. Couldn't take it anymore. That was his. Now I'm going to get upset, right? That was his reward for coming back home to help China. They basically beat him to death. They killed him. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So one more comment on also the question that you asked about why Deng Xiaoping and Zhou Enlai was also happened to be in Paris, and I think one of the reasons was political thoughts, some of which being more radical, were also more tolerated in Paris compared to other places.
HORE, 1921, because that's the freedom that the artists and the writers were seeking, but it was also the political freedom as well, right? More so than in China, I suppose.
And I was going to say,
cool,
I think there has to be some correlation between like artists, writers who seek this kind of freedom of expression and people who pursue political agenda who also seek freedom of expression.
Oh, wow.
Them being avant-garde thinkers of the time, they all want to be at the same place, and there's some kind of connection between, I think, political, let's say artists and
political thinkers,
trailblazers.
That is almost a profound. I would say that's a profound thought. How do these two things, trailblazers in art and trailblazers in politics, how do these things go together? We could go back to Vienna, by the way. Vienna was where Trotsky was in 1900. You could do this all the way down through history.
Tito.
And Tito as well. Good for you. That is a profound thought, sir. That is a profound thought. Wow. And then we could add to that, because I know some of you are interested in it, money. Right? You could add, and I think people overrate that part. Like, did they go to Paris, or were they in were the artists in Florence just because the Medici were there and the money was there? Did the artists just go where the money is? Did the politicians just go where the radical, because you're talking about radical thought is, you add to that money. And what is the role of money in something like this? I know, you must be getting very uncomfortable. Thank you very much, Mr. Zhao. That was fantastic. Really, really interesting group of people. 谢谢你们. If anybody wants a book, I'll sign the book. 艺术
I have a question. So
Yeah.
you mentioned
One more question though.
So Paris is a tolerant stage for the opinions, arts, but by that time it's still long before the feminists, right?
Yeah.
So how was the attitude towards gay lesbian artists? Are they brave enough to?
Fantastic question. Fantastic question. What about the attitude toward gay artists? And here is there. I have the answer right away. Gertrude Stein, lesbian. Hart Crane, one of my favorite poets. There's a whole chapter in the book about Hart Crane. Could just go around with his boyfriend in public in Paris. 没关系，没事，没事。Gay men, 没事。Gay women, 没关系。Black guy with white girl. 没关系. I don't know. I never figured out whether Pan Yu Liang had a boyfriend who was a favorite, but I do know Pan Yu had a really pretty, very pretty French girl that was became I think briefly his wife. 没事，中国法国。没事，同性恋。没事，没关系，没关系. They were incredibly tolerant about sexuality, because Gertrude Stein, great question. Gertrude Stein says it doesn't matter. If you're gay or straight, if you're black or white or Chinese, if you're an artist, you're okay. You're fine. If you're an artist in Paris, that's all you need to be. No wonder they liked it. You know, no wonder they liked it. And many gay, by the way, many gay writers from America were there. That became like the beginning of that big movement. Hart Crane was the excellent example of it. It's a good question.
Is the Paris only for artists?
Is Paris only for artists? Well, no.
No, I mean
Paris is for lovers. No. Let's go through it. No. It's a good one. No. Paris was, we never even talked about it. Paris was for Gershwin. This is where he wrote this. Oh my God, Gershwin did so well in Paris. He wanted to be with Debussy and Ravel, Satie, etc. So the musicians were in Paris. Cole Porter was in Paris. He was a friend of these people I was talking about. Not just music then, also fashion. You want to be somebody important in the world of fashion? Paris. Architecture, Paris. Journalists, Sinovision. Journalists, big time, go to Paris. Everybody wanted that posting. I want to be the Paris correspondent of New York Journal. Fantastic job, fantastic. Everybody wanted to be in Paris for different reasons. Maybe not so much, those of you who are in money, and in science, maybe not so much. Berlin was still more important. Vienna was very important for psychotherapy. Money, you still go to London. Paris, the Bourse was one thing, but it wasn't a big deal. London would be more important, and in Frankfurt, never Berlin. Great question, though, right?
I think this question is the tolerance for diversity is only for the artists or
No. It was general. No. Make sure. Walk down the Champs-Élysées, and it's a white girl, Nancy Cunard, and a Heron. Make sure. Nobody even looks. Nobody even says anything.
Even for the
nobody goes like that. I would say, by the way, it took the United States decades to get close to that kind of acceptance and tolerance. Decades. I think it's probably one of the reasons why Pan Yu Liang stayed there. Nobody looked at her the way sometimes Chinese girls get looked at in the South, in America. Nobody looked at her like that. Like, what are you doing with that guy? Very, very tolerant. Not just artists. Everybody was like that, as far as I can tell.
The city by that time was so tolerant to all kinds of this culture thing. It's because of this kind of capitalism is driven this thing.
Oh, you got to make it economic and political. I guess so. I don't know. I like Paris myself, and I know it's somewhat political. But in Paris, in a lot of parts of France, if the guys come from Morocco or from Africa, they get a look. Paris, sure. No problem right there. I don't know if it's economic. That's a really good question. He's probably got a theory. He's got a theory.
Because I remember
Yes, go ahead.
in like the 15th century, like I forgot which emperor it is, but he's like tried to break this like gap between like different social hierarchies. Status.
Well, you're going to go back in history? Yeah, here we go. We're going to have the history lesson. I'll put you all to sleep. But I'm going to remind you of a marvelous French philosopher, Michel de Montaigne. Montaigne in the late 16th century or into the 17th century, was already writing about tolerance and other cultures and how he respected other cultures. Montaigne gave it to Shakespeare. Shakespeare passes it on. These bloody French will give, we could say a lot of bad things about French people. They're so nasty to Americans. But these French were very sophisticated when it came to other cultures. And I'll tell you, if I were giving this same lecture in Great Neck, and a lot of the people who would be in my audience would be Yotairen. And Yotairen in Paris, even in the 16th century, measure. Yotairen in London, Yotairen in Spain, wow, big problems. Always looked down upon. Yotairen in Paris, measure. And you know what happened to Yotairen in Germany, Turkwa, and Austria, but always Paris, something different. And I will say that goes a long way back in French history, that Paris was this international place. That's why we call it the Shanghai of Europe. Sorry. Shanghai is the Paris of China. Any more comments or questions? Yes, in the back. Jay. I forgot your name. Yeah.
So what is the most fascinating part that, well, your friends can do for
Such a good answer. What's your name? Chang. Oh, I love it. I love this question. This question has to do with something called composition. Do you mind? Do you have a moment? Yeah. Are you uncomfortable? Are you back? Want to stand up and sit down again? Let's go to one of Pan's paintings. Not that one. Not that one. Maybe this one. I love this painting. I think it's fantastic. Not that one. This one is a very French painting. That's a Cézanne painting. Now, let's go back. This one. This one. Now, figure and ground. Ready? This is your lesson in painting, and I'll stop, I promise. Figure and ground. You go. This is the figure against the background. Figure and ground gives you 3 dimensions. Figure and ground says, nigga, this foot is coming closest to you, and her head is a little further away, and then something's back here, right? Figure and ground is one of the essential things that you would learn if you were at the École des Beaux-Arts. How to place the figure, how to give the 3 dimensions. Now, here's the thing that I find interesting as I go through even this painting, and I look at the yellow part or the red part under her arm, and that is this. She was very interested almost still in the ground, in the background. You know? So was, by the way, so was Van Gogh, so was Gauguin. You look at a good Van Gogh painting, you get some interesting things back here. So was Gauguin. But I think there's something Chinese about it. Do you want to help me? Chinese art. Who paints in ink? Who said? Somebody did. Chinese art. Figure and ground. Background. What about it?
Sometimes we will give some blend.
Yeah. And the background does what? It's not empty, right?
Yeah.
It's white, like you paint ink on paper, right? So you leave a lot of white, right? But that white isn't just background. That white is something. What is it?
It's something you are imagining.
You got it. I think that one thing that you can find when you look at Pan, maybe I'm over-interpreting. But when I look at Pan and then I look at just the Pan, see, there's something more interesting in the background. And I think she got that a little bit from being a very good Chinese painter too. Oh, huh? Okay. Yeah, that's you. No. Yeah, you're skeptical. That looks like a French painting to you. Yeah. Yeah, but it's background. Yeah, I agree. That's true. It's a wonderful word, by the way. We could really have a talk, you and I, about painting. Information. There's information in this background, and that's the information of here, and the pattern here. But it's the places here that some people would call empty, but I don't think she thought of them as empty. I think she knew how to use that white. I think that was her Chinese style. And actually, I got that a little bit from someone who wrote very well about her, who said, you know, guess what? This is what made her particularly interesting to people in France, too. She knew how to use that background, that white background. Great question.
But you said
Yes,
it
go
also
ahead.
reminds you of Matisse. Is it
Oh, very
because
much.
Matisse also draws some inspiration from Japan?
Oh yeah, and China. Actually, you want to do that one? I think I keep wondering, did she know Matisse personally? And that would be a better biography. And I don't have a really good biography. One of you should write a great biography of Pan Yu Liang. Really, there's not a good one. Some things are. Did she meet? It's very, very important when you write a book like this. One thing you want to know: did she meet Picasso? Did they sit at the same party? Did they have a conversation? Like when I did this book and I wanted to say so-and-so was connected to so-and-so or studied with so-and-so, I really made sure that they were in the room together. Because otherwise you're kind of saying, oh, it looks like Matisse. That's bullshit. sorry. I didn't say that. I said that's not the way to do this. What you want is you want to know, did they know each other? Was she really influenced? Did she see the Matisse at this particular show? That kind of thing is really important, you know, to write what we call cultural history. This is a cultural history, this book. This says, this American met this French person. They played the piano together. Gershwin and Stravinsky played the piano together at the same piano. And this is what they played. I know, I did the research. It's in the book. But I don't have that same level of detail about Pan. Wow, great questions, right? Any more questions or comments? Sir?
Did Pan Yu Liang has any pants on her nude male body?
Say it again?
I mean, did Pan Yu Liang has any pants on her nude male body?
Yes. She painted many nude males, and that's the one when her husband saw it back in Nanjing or Shanghai. He said, that's it, I'm done. Yes, she did both. Nude men and nude women. Why, do you want some nude men in my show? I just like it. I like girls. I will. Won't it be fun next spring on Chengdao? Let's all have a party. Let's all have a party at my museum. I'll show you it's a beautiful place. I have a beautiful gardens and a mansion, and I'm going to have a show, the Jazz Age, in France. And one room is going to be Pan. And I'm going to get the best paintings I can get, even if I have to get them from Beijing. And then I'm going to ask Mr. Liu, can I borrow the Modigliani? And I'm going to put it in the same room. It'll be fantastic. He's probably going to say, get out of here. $172 million painting? It's a lot. Forget it. Well, what a wonderful group. Any more questions? Any more comments? Yeah, go ahead.
This is probably extra bad.
Extra bad.
But you spent time in China in 1984.
Yeah,
I was wondering about the boom of arts like that. For me personally, was like a midnight Paris moment.
Wow.
But I wonder if that's true because I was born like that.
Well, all right. Can I start a little bit? It was magic. In 1984 in China, actually it goes together with today. When Pan and Fule and Xu Beihong and Premier Zhou were in Paris, that was a great group. Don't you agree? That's a really intelligent, I'm not a great fan of Mao Zedong, but I really think Premier Zhou was a very intelligent man. And I also think that Xu Beihong was a very great painter. That was a great generation. Let me tell you about a great generation in China, my dear friend. There was a group of very brave, very intelligent people who came back to the universities in the year 1977, 78. They were the first ones to come through the doors again after the Cultural Revolution. And many of them became my students. You have never seen students so eager to learn everything that they had been denied for 10 years. And some of them, their parents, had been professors and scholars. And when they came in, and I'm not kidding, they were my students. And they were the greatest generation of university students. I think, maybe somebody here, because you guys are so young, right? But they were the greatest generation. And the conversations, my dear friend, that we would have at night in my apartment over pijiu and huashan, and we would talk about art, literature, and yes, we talked about politics. And yes, we use the word democracy. And in 1989, Ijo Bacho, those were also those brave kids. Those were the ones who were in Tiananmen Square. It was fantastic. I loved my students then. I loved my students then. I was so proud of them. Everything we did in class was fantastic. But you should know, by the way, too, you're so young, right? If I said something, and I'm, spiritual pollution, right? If I said something, I brought up one day Freud. Mr. Jia, his name was Mr. Jia. He was the communist thought guy at the back of the room. Mr. Jia said, "Oh, I think it's time for a cup of tea." He would drag me back. He would take me back to my office, and I would have to sit down and have a cup of tea. And he'd say, "That's not," and this is the word he used to use in English, "it's not convenient to talk about." Mr. Jia. And you know what? After a while, I began to really enjoy Mr. Jia. I loved just fucking with him. You know what I mean? I would sort of get close, and I'd say, Sigmund Freud, and then I'd wait till he would do this. Or I would maybe talk about, because you didn't want to talk about, remember, this is 1984. No D.H. Lawrence. No D.H. Lawrence, no Freud, we definitely don't go into that. And I used to love to play with Mr. Jia. But that was a really great generation. Remember too, who came out of China at that time? Tendun? That was Tendun. That was Steve, and I know Tendun. That was Tendun, that was Yevon Chun, that was Beidao. Maybe a little bit before then, a little older, or no? Yeah, just about that time. That was the wonderful singer Ho Dejian was around. And then of course it became later on all these names that you've probably heard. Cai Qing was the girl. Wang Dan, Wu Kaixi. That was a really interesting generation. That was a great generation. I mean, I look at you. You're very pretty. Not you, but and you're very, very young. But that was a really great generation. They had not been in university, and then in 1977 they said you can come back in. I was there. It was fantastic. I'm so glad I was. I feel like I was a part of Chinese history. I feel like it goes together with this. That great generation of Lu Xun and Fu Lei, etc., is on that level. In this country, whenever somebody says, "Oh, the greatest generation," you're talking about my dad. World War II. Those guys. This was a very great generation. The kids who came back to university in 1978. Whew, boy, were they good too. It was 1 in 800 students applying. 1 out of 800 applicants got into Hebei Shida. And that's just Hebei, stupid Hebei. This is not Tsinghua, 1 out of 800. That's how hard it was to get back into university. Okay?
I just want to add up the question.
Yeah.
Like in the 80s, what kind of artists you mostly talk about? You talk about? Pan Yu Liang or
No. Never heard the name Pan Yu Liang when I was in China. No, not at all. But there was this fascination with what's going on back in America, and that's what I am. I'm a curator, so we talk about what's hot, what's not, what's pop art, Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Franz Klein, Klein, K-L-I-N-E. If we had more time, I would give it to you. Black paint on white background, boom, boom, and it's that looks just like Chinese calligraphy. It's so cool. So that was abstract expressionism and abstract art. It was sort of fun. And then music, the music was fantastic. We had Qinghai pianos, and they were always a little bit out of tune, So they would play. They would teach me a little bit of Chinese music, and then I would sit down and say, now we could play some wrong, because listen, in Shigaozhuang, in Hebei, they didn't have a lot of Western music. They didn't have the scores. So I would just bring music. We would play music. They would teach me a little Chinese. I would teach them a little Mozart. They didn't. When I was in Shigaozhuang, many of them didn't have Mozart sonatas, Beethoven sonatas, Scarlatti, a little bit of Bach, but not too much. The only ones who were there. Whoa! You asked this question, right? Yeah. We had some amazing musicians too, but their instruments had been smashed by the Red Guards, and their hands had been broken. And they had been taught in the 1950s and 60s, they'd been taught by the Russians. So they knew Tchaikovsky, Lachak, they knew Glinka, they knew Mussorgsky, sure. They knew the Russians, right? But not too many people had Mozart, Beethoven, Scarlatti, Haydn, for instance. You a musician? No. Who is? He is. Yeah. Am I right? Am I wrong? Wait, no, go ahead. No, but you asked me about that generation. I remember way back with talking to Tan Dun. What did he? I mean, I want you to picture this. This is a guy who had a Xinghai piano that had many notes that didn't work. This is before he came to New York. This is before he married a beautiful fashion model named Jane Huang. Before Crouching Tiger. This is a guy at a piano without an orchestra who would sit and play on this crappy piano things that later on would be recorded by the BBC. All right? This is Tan Dun, but this is Tan Dun in the 1980s. It's pretty amazing, okay? That's how great Chinese people can be. You're getting me all choked up again. Yeah.
Yeah, so one last piece of comment. It would be fantastic and fascinating to like go tour the Guggenheim exhibition.
Right now.
Like,
we should all go.
With your guidance.
We're talking about that generation.
Especially we're talking about that generation. Even though the exhibition is like named post 89, a lot of the artists unshown grew up from the 80s.
That's great. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Also mentioned some movements happened during the 80s.
You got that. You brought that up. Bravo, sir. You're getting more than one beer. You're getting 2 beers. And you know, Premier Zhao. Premier Zhao, may I make a recommendation? You get a really good speaker who speaks good Chinese, not me, and you have a salon about that show, because that show is really important. And you obviously have people who are interested. That is a really important show. Bravo, sir.